An island can't move until it does. In North Carolina, where I lived for 22 years, barrier islands frame the East Coast. And on the weekends in my 20s, we would rent a house and go and sit on the rattan furniture and walk among the high grasses which blew in the ever-present winds. A professor that I had at that time, Dr. Orrin Pilkey, was starting to talk about things, about how sands were shifting grain by grain, about how the sea level was rising just inches and millimeters at a time. And as he made these predictions, many scoffed at him. They said, "Islands don't move. The sea doesn't rise." They ignored him, and the leaders in the communities just went out and built structures out of steel and concrete, just in case, but to keep those islands where they were. They knew that islands didn't move. He warned them it would cause the beaches to erode faster, and they didn't listen. An island can't move until it does. An estuary doesn't dry up until it does. When I was in my 20s, I took a 10-day canoe trip through the Everglades, gliding across the mangrove swamps and among the alligators who were just a few feet away, sun-drunk. Other scientists were starting to predict that water diversion and population explosion and agricultural runoff could cause the vegetation to fill in these beautiful groves and make that great watery landscape impassable and impervious. In those days when I went through, the water teemed with birds and fish and other life that you wouldn't see anywhere else, including the elusive manatees. Those who made their living roaring tourists through the quiet otherworldliness in their airboats scoffed. How could such a wet place go dry? The Everglades are now half the size that they were a century ago, but the change has been almost too slow to notice until that first boat couldn't get through. An island doesn't move until it does. An estuary doesn't evaporate or dry out until it does. A religion can't change until it does. Slow changes can sometimes have fast endings. The shifting of the sands is so imperceptible, the collapse of the house off the cliff less so. In the 1800s, there were these women. Mary Stafford and Eleanor Gordon were among them, who were tapped by Jenkin Lloyd Jones, a visionary leader who saw that he needed a new kind of ministry in this muddy, rough, unsettled place that was the West and the westward white expansion across this nation. Those who were used to the refined venues of New England weren't interested in these pulpits, and so Jones had the idea that he could give them to these women. And they had ideas, too, that churches could be the basis of community, that they could feed people and house people and shelter them and teach them skills that would benefit them and their communities throughout their lives. That they could teach people that it was important to be well, not only in spirit, but also in mind and in heart. He realized that they could teach, that you could go beyond just the collection of the Christian scriptures, though those were important, and embrace a both and also embrace the other teachings of the lessons we learn just from living our lives day to day. And so, though the Boston Brahmin, as they were called, scoffed and said, "This is just a fad, it will pass," these women were part of this great movement towards what we now know as humanism, and what grew so quickly it soon became known as the problem in the West, and it changed our faith forever. Those men in Boston might never have imagined a world where a woman could sit as the president of our association, or where Black people and Latinx people and Asian people and people across a spectrum of genders could also lead from our pulpits, from our pews, and across our communities. And yet, all this is true in our living tradition. Today we know that those North Carolina barrier islands shift just a little bit every day, and that the waters in the Everglades National Park evaporate just a little bit more every day in this warming planet. And that changes in our living tradition also happen, even if they come so slowly that sometimes we don't even notice that they're happened until they have. That's how change happens. In our U.S. society, the grains of change around religion in general have begun a few decades ago as the excesses and abuses of institutionalized religion began to be aired more and more and more, causing many to move away in distaste. Media began to take up more and more of our time and other pursuits, and to tell us very subtly that community was a waste of time. We could build our own worlds without much need for interaction. In 2017, our then president passed a tax bill that took away the tax advantage for charitable organizations for many. And those organizations have always served in our democracy as a balance against the pursuit of individual wants. And that funding base has very clearly eroded, as it was predicted that it would, and actually as it was planned that it would. And in 2020, COVID entered our shores, creating changes that few would have predicted outside of science fiction, that we would live in a world where we wear masks almost everywhere we go, that we would not be able to come together as we have across generations, that singing would become something that would be so difficult to do together, one of the most basic ways we gather. An island doesn't move until it does. An estuary does not lose its waters until it does. A people cannot change until they do, until they broaden their sense of what they can be together. And religion doesn't vanish as a player in our world and in our society until suddenly it does. Some are predicting that will happen within the next couple decades. A slow erosion in the fabric of caring for one another has been happening, and we need to pay attention. If we care about this holy place, we need to support it. If we want it to thrive, we need to give it our time. If we want it to survive, we need to donate. If the sands shift, we need to have the vision to move the house before it falls into the sea. Counter the poisonous chemicals that are causing the grasses to multiply and taking the waters. Ours is a living tradition, and we celebrate that every year here. The problem in the West became the human-centered religion that many of us enter each day with joy, as we also embrace the traditions from our Jewish and Christian roots, and other world religions as well. The good news is that we are in a position to continue to thrive if we are willing to change and pay attention and notice and decide that being a community with all its glories and challenges still matters, that aspiring in a world where we know that change happens that we do not want still matters, that being what we are still is an important part for ourselves and also for our larger world. Often in this service, which happens at the last Sunday of January, almost every year, it's one of our traditions, we celebrate the past, that handing down of traditions that Ron talked about. But here is what I'll say to you today. We need to celebrate the future by deciding that we are not going to let time just slowly tick away and erode what we have built so carefully here. That we will move on in these times for what they need, that we will stop the runoff of hyper-capitalism that is certain to dry the wellsprings of our faith as much as the agricultural blooms cause the noxious choking weeds of the Everglades waters. We need to greet this time with a new commitment to inclusion and also new ways of being together in the same way that the women embraced new ideas about what was faithfulness. We know about change. We've been through it. And we also know that we can pay attention to the investments we need to make. We need this congregation and we need this faith. And I can't spend this message today looking back, because I think it's time for us to stop waiting for some other world that we used to know to emerge, and to take hold of the resolve of hope and to move into the future that is around us now, to hold the values that go beyond individual desires and still speak of our collective liberation. 2 years have passed since we gathered in the ways that are most familiar to us. And in those times, we have gained many people who some of us have never even been in physical presence with. And we have lost many people, not only to death, but to the higher cost of living that continues to be true in this area. We have many people who have, in this age, become more quickly infirm than they might have in other times because of the medical shortages that have occurred during this time. And they rely on our virtual connections to give them what they may never experience again in person. We, who affirm this tradition as a living one, can make the commitments of attention and intention live among us. An island can't move until it does. And an estuary can't dry up until it does. And a religion needs its commitments for each age. And we are the ones to be the droplets of water that make the ripple that will allow us to celebrate who we are long into the future. That is the living tradition we celebrate in 2022.